Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming tonight to this talk. Can I remind you, please, to switch your mobile phones to silent, please? And in the question and answer session, if you can wait for the microphone, because we're recording this and it's being streamed live online. I've just now got to introduce the moderator for tonight's event. It's Peter Watt. He's lecturer in Hispanic Studies at Sheffield University and the author of this book, Drug War, which is on sale along with Tone's book tonight, and you can buy it after the event from me here at the table. So I hope you enjoy the event, and over to Peter.
Thank you. Well, thanks for coming. We've got a very interesting evening lined up, I think. Teun Vutten has covered many war zones as a photojournalist, including some of the most ravaged regions of the globe: Gaza, Sarajevo, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, Congo. And one of the interesting things I thought he says in the introduction to his book is that despite having covered all these regions in war, he's never seen such barbarism as what is now engulfing parts of Mexico. He's never seen such brutality and such a kind of lust for violence, and this very disturbing public display of violence and cruelty. I think what his book does is that it explodes a few myths. There's lots of myths about the drug war in Mexico, and he explodes the myth, which is the dominant discourse of the Mexican government, that anyone who's a victim of the violence, in the last 6 years, there have been, we think, about 60,000 deaths.
More, 80,000.
Well, it could be more, and thousands of people who have been disappeared, according to the Mexican Commission for Human Rights. The fact is that nobody really knows. In the book, in fact, there's a picture of a graveyard of unclaimed bodies. Nobody knows who's in there. And so what we see in the book is a juxtaposition between these victims of crimes, of violent crimes, and everyday life. And we get the sense, I think, as you explain in your introduction, that everyone's vulnerable to some kind of violent act, and you never know when it's going to happen, and you never know who's going to be responsible for it. So I think that is one of the important things that the book does, and it shows us. So the format for tonight will be, Teun is going to show us some photographs, about 24 photographs from the book, and then we'll have a discussion between us two, and then there'll be room for about 45 minutes for questions from the audience. Okay?
Yes, okay. Can everybody hear me? Thanks everybody for coming. I'm really, I always appreciate when people come to these sort of events, especially if the subject is pretty heavy, I would say. I hope you will learn some interesting things tonight. Basically, as Peter told, I'm a photojournalist. Originally, I'm an anthropologist, so I photograph, but I write as well. I wrote 2 books, one about the war in Sierra Leone and one about homeless people in New York. I had a talk actually in the Frontline Club a couple of years ago. Basically, I wrote an introduction of this book, as Peter told. 22 years I've been working I was present when the genocide in Rwanda started. I've seen pretty nasty things, to say diplomatically, in Sierra Leone and Liberia, Congo, Grozny, you name it. This is savagery, depravity I have not seen, and basically 3-4 years ago, as anthropologist, I've been a lot of times in Latin America. I did my master thesis in Ecuador. In 1990, I already was hitchhiking through Colombia, may sound strange, but at that time I thought that was like a good idea, and I spent a lot of time in Medellin, at that time the most dangerous city in the world. And it was already since a long time a little bit on my radar, narco-trafficking, crime, paramilitary groups, political agendas, and civil social disintegration. So in 97, 98 there was a lot of time I was many times in Colombia. In 2007 I made a story about gangs in Honduras. Honduras is a very small country with a very high crime rate, with a couple of gangs which totally control a couple of neighborhoods. So after that I heard about the problems in Mexico, and Mexico everything was just way much more bigger and wilder and more crazy and more insane, and I decided that that was what I wanted to do. I was very lucky to get a grant. I could find some magazines that I promised that I would return safe. So I got a kickstart and I went to Ciudad Juarez, and what I saw was really beyond belief. It was in 2009 it was for the first time the most dangerous city in the world. 10 people were killed, impunity 98%. Basically everybody could kill everybody without any qualms. And in between that I found a very brave population. Mexico is not a third world country, as we all know. It's a very civilized country which produced some of the best literature, art, even architects. It's an extremely civilized country. Yes, of course, there are differences between the rich and the poor, but it's not some kind of wild third world country where you have some warring tribes. So being an anthropologist, I got also totally fascinated from how come such a country is gripped by a drug war. It was very strange in the beginning. A lot of people, because normally I worked in conflicts which have a social-political context, human rights. I worked in Rwanda, of course Colombia, Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, all these countries, Gaza. And people asked me, they thought it was a little bit like a paparazzi subject, basically crime hunting, ambulance chasing, a war between a couple of bandas loquísimo. That's a stereotype some people in Europe have of the Mexicans. And yet there are some locos, as we all know, but also some very sane, intelligent people as well. But it took me a long time to explain to them, listen, this is not some kind of criminal problem. This is not some kind of fringe, marginal criminal problem. This is a takeover of civil society, of international order, of the state by organized crime, and a very successful endeavor. And then every country has crime problems, and in every country have authorities fighting criminals, and in every country have corruption. But in Mexico it was a totally different story. The way authorities seamlessly merge into criminals, and a very gray zone, and territories which are de facto under control from organized crime. And I was in a couple of cities. I was in one city just across the border, east Mexico, Nuevo Laredo. And I had rented a car and I had driven all the way from Texas just across the border. And then I talked to the US consulate, because I always like to talk to people from all sides. And I told me, listen, I want to go to Monterrey, 150 kilometers along the highway. And they told me, don't even think about it. There are checkpoints on the highway. And I said, oh, army checkpoints? No, checkpoint from the gangs and from the Zetas, and they stop you. And they can joke with you, oh, you're from Holland, the cows, the tulips, nice. Or they can kill you, they can kidnap you, they can torture you, they can do whatever you want. And even if there's a military checkpoint 100 meters down the road, they won't do anything. So that's kind of a very weird realization, that you have civilized countries where some areas, especially in the state of Tamaulipas, are completely controlled by organized crime. We will talk later a little bit more about these ramifications. I still have the feeling I want to say something. We will come to it later. The most shocking thing was like the near total impunity, and as Peter told, there is official discourse of the government. They say the violence is violence between cartels for the domination of certain lucrative smuggling roads. And yes, there is a lot of fighting between cartels. But basically 98% of the murders in Ciudad Juarez are and will never be solved. So basically nobody knows who is killing who. And there are like a lot of conspiracy theories. One that there is like, this is a typical Latin American word, limpieza social, social cleansing, in which undesirable elements which are not very productive for society, prostitutes, junkies, homeless, street kids are eliminated. There is another theory that it's like installation of military dictatorship by the federal government. There are many more theories. Basically, nobody knows exactly what is going on, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. I show you a little bit of my photos right now. I want to tell you one more thing. I've been working on this like for a couple of 3 years. This book is the product, and I tried to photograph all aspects of the war. The only aspect I was not able to photograph was like the perpetrators, and in most war zones it's possible to hang out a little bit with the bad guys, with the rebels, with people who might be, according to international law, war criminals. I talk very diplomatically now, because you need to be very diplomatically in war zones. But in Mexico it was just too sketchy, and I did not want to get friends with big warlords, with big drug criminals. If you do something wrong, you just dead on the spot, and I never saw that disrespect for life in Mexico, and so I was very careful not to push it. We'll talk later more about that. I show you very briefly along my photos, and 5 minutes, and then we can start with the discussion with Peter. And in case you have any question, you always can interrupt me. This is nightlife in Juarez, and it just I try to portray that atmosphere of gloom and doom and fear that's hanging over the city when night falls. At one point, Ciudad Juarez across the border from El Paso was a very bustling tourist town. Like 10 years ago, all the kids from El Paso University and the military, the soldiers in the military base, they came every weekend to Juarez to party, go to brothels, to discotheques. You could drink, nobody asked for you. So it was complete party town for students and soldiers, and it has had a tradition for this for like 30, 40 years. During the Prohibition, people came, Americans came to Juarez to get drunk. But the last 5, 6 years, the city has died completely. Nightlife comes to a standstill. Of the main boulevard, you had like 30 bars, and only 10 are still open, and you have like only a couple of people in there. So I try to capture that feeling of the desolate feeling. This is a murder victim I found in Culiacan. I was hanging out with local journalists. That was one of the ways I worked. I worked a lot with local authorities. Sometimes you could go on patrols with police. Later on it became more difficult in Ciudad Juarez, but I was there in 2009, and you had a very nice public relations department. They were very helpful. This photo I took in Culiacan, where I was with some photojournalists. And this is a typical way people are killed. Their mouths and their hands are tied with duct tape, and then they are, in the best case, they get a shot in the neck. In the worst case, they get more nasty treatment with torture and other kinds of things. This is a murder victim, and again, what I like about this photo is like basically this is like a local municipal cop, and he's like a kid too, and he's basically bewildered, and also it doesn't look very professional, and it doesn't look like a serious forensic investigation. And what you saw in Ciudad Juarez, you had like sometimes 10 murders a day. So forensic detectives come, they make photos, they count the bullets, they put bullet markers, and then when they're still busy, they get already the call from the next department, and that's also one of the reasons murders are not solved. I mean, I live in Brussels, and we have, I think, one murder a month. So they can put like 30 detectives on one murder, and that's like unbelievable if you compare it with Juarez.
Body dumped there or murdered there?
Basically, sometimes people are murdered at another place, taken in a car, and they call it encobijadas. They rolled in the blankets, and then they dumped in the blanket. And sometimes they killed on the scene, but most of the time, and of course forensic detectives can establish that this here were like 33 bullets laying around, bullet shells of Kalashnikov. This guy was probably brought to the spot, already his hand tied with electricity cord and blindfolded, and then they pumped basically 30 bullets in him. So they have different ways of executing people. This is a graveyard in Culiacan, and Culiacan is like basically the cradle of, it's in the, a little bit on the Pacific coast, is the cradle of all drug lords. And this drug business has been going on for like 100 years. Chinese introduced opium, and then there was a little bit of marijuana, but it was always a little bit small scale and a little bit romantic, and there was not too much violence involved, like cowboys producing marijuana and smuggling it to the Yankees. And it was part of the folkloristic tradition, basically a little bit outlaw nation. But this extreme violence and basically the cartels, I forgot to mention that cartels have become like ultra-capitalist organizations, totally ruthless. This is something new. And in Culiacan you have what is called a lot of exhibitions of narcocultura. Narco has become an adjective in Mexico. You have narcocultura, you have narco songs, you have narco cars, you have narco fashion, you have narco boots, everything which is used by the Los Narcos, and Los Narcos are the traffickers, the bad guys. And then of course you have a lot of wannabes that use symbols which narcos use. But this a cemetery where you have like sometimes 2 or 3 story mausoleums, and this is basically all the rich people in Culiacan. And people estimate that 98 of these buildings are, the mausoleums are built by drug lords, not by very wealthy industrial farmers. This is people looking at the crime scene, and it has become so totally normal for people in Juarez that families take their kids out if someone is shot, and they just watch the police pick up the bodies, and the forensic detectives do their work. And have people look a little bit disturbed, but I have other photos where people look, in the book, people look like completely casual, like it's the most normal thing. These are kids protesting. There is opposition in Ciudad Juarez. You have a lot of organizations, human rights organizations, women organizations, but it's very hard to pinpoint exactly who the culprit is. Of course, a lot of, especially left-wing people, try to blame the government, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And protesting against the cartels and against organized crime is the same like protesting against the bad weather and the rain. They don't really care. And sometimes you have like a lot of protests, and they have become more like rituals. And I think, of course, it's good that there is opposition of the people, and that the people really push for the government to make an end to impunity. But sometimes it really takes the form of rituals, and you have like big demonstrations in Juarez, like 50 people march, and everybody just goes around his own business. This is another street shot at night, and Juarez at night looks really gloomy, and the most scary part of my job was at the end. I needed photos from nightlife, so I had to go to all these bars, and I found a man in El Paso who had written a book about clubs, so he was my guide for a couple of nights, and after that I started to dare to go by myself, but there were times that I never spent any minute longer than necessarily at night on the streets. This is also the red light district. You have a lot of prostitution, and I think this person is a transvestite. I didn't talk to him or her, but even the red light district is suffering. There are hardly any more clients for prostitutes. Taxis have no more clients, and like 80% of the bars are closed. So it's like a total the death of nightlife as well. This is also symbolic. You have these kind of mariachi bands, and they normally they hang around in the center, and sometimes they hired by people who have a fiesta. They organize a mariachi band and they pay for $200. They pay the whole night, and they go in a lot of bars, and then you give them like $2 or $3, and then they play a song. But since the bars are nearly empty, these mariachi bands are out of work too. And when I saw this photo, I thought it looked pretty dramatic and cliche and pathetic. But sometimes, as a photographer, you cannot resist taking pathetic shots. I have one photo, you can see it on my website. It's like a soldier in a destroyed music school in Mostar in Yugoslavia, and he's playing a piano, a grand piano, and on the wall is a portrait of Tito. And basically, I was working with him in music school, and he said he used to play rock and roll. He said, "Hey, an old piano, let me see if it works." And he played some, and the whole scene looked so pathetic that I even didn't want to take a photo. But I said, "Well, I'm here, so why just not take one shot?" And that became one of my best-selling photos ever. But
Why have all the bars closed?
basically, no more clients, because people are afraid to come to bars, because a lot of course, a lot of smaller crime is taking place in bars. And bars are perceived to be extremely dangerous. But most important, like in the weekend, you used to have like 30,000 Americans coming to party it up in Ciudad Juarez. They just cross the bridge very easy. It's like 5 minutes walk from El Paso to Juarez, to the center. And right now you have like maybe 2 or 3 Americans a week. So that's a big difference. And people from Juarez, they don't dare to go out at night. And there were a lot of shootings where a commando armado, it's called an armed commando, which is also very cynical. A commando we normally associate with rebel groups or with soldiers, but with a band of criminals, it's called commando armado there. They burst in a cafe, and they maybe they're looking for one bad guy, but they kill like 6 or 7 people in the bar. So I went to one bar, the Yankees, and I met some friends there, so I went back a couple of times. But then later on, I found that 5 months ago, 6 people were killed in the same bar. You know, just for no obvious reason. This is the cemetery of Ciudad Juarez. It's 30 kilometers out of the city center. It's in the middle of the desert. It's where all the poor people bury their friends and family. So this is a special section for like non-identified bodies, and as I told, like during the most violent year 2010, like 9 or 10 people are killed on average, and most people were identified, but you always had like 1 or 2 people a day who were not identified, and they were brought to the city morgue. And sometimes they were identified later, but every month you had like 30, 40 people that were not claimed, and they were thrown in a mass grave every month, or they got like a separate grave like this, and masculino non identificado, it means a letter. And then you get a number, and I think that this was one of the saddest thing I ever saw. I mean, being dumped in the desert with a metal memorial plate, which is slowly rusting away and just falls down on the ground. Basically illustrates very pointedly how cheap life has become there. This is at the crime scene, and this girl breaks down, and I think her boyfriend got killed, and this other girl is a friend or a neighbor who is like became totally hysterical as well, and then a police watching the scene. This is the city center, and a man in Mexican dress. And these are again kids, and again these kids are not like criminals, they're like high school kids. And one of the boyfriends was killed, and maybe they did some stupid things, maybe they got, there is still place there up front. Maybe the boyfriends were killed, but they don't look like big time gangsters, and this was one of the hardest things to do. I mean, if people are suffering and crying and like in total distress, as a photojournalist who photographs war, it's part of the story to capture grief, but I always find this the hardest thing. You have to really put the camera on the face of crying people, and I found this always a little bit embarrassing, but you have to learn how to do it, and I always try to do it as quick as possible without interference. The policeman killed, a lot of police are even involved in transport police are involved in narcotic business, and as I told before, corruption is on all levels, from the highest federal level till the lowest local cop, because the money is so big and money is very corruptive. But there are a couple of legit and very sincere narcotic cops fighting trafficking, but there's a very grey zone in which they cooperate or just ignore or tacitly, what do you pronounce it? Tacitly? Tacit approval, tolerance, and a lot of times, a lot of local cops don't have a choice. They went with the criminals to the same high school. They know each other. The criminals know where they live, where the family, where the kids live, and they just basically say, listen, you work a little bit with us, you give us a little bit of intel, and you don't interfere too much, and you look the other way, and we give you a couple of $100 a month, and if not, you're a dead man. It's called plato plomo. So they don't have a moral choice. A policeman cannot say, I'm sorry, I'm incorruptible, and I will abide by the law, and if you do dirty business, I will arrest you. No way, you're a dead man. And the traffic cops in Ciudad Juarez, they had a reputation of being involved in all kind of shady business. And maybe this is like a elimination of a traffic cop, but again, nobody knows what it is. Maybe just to scare the traffic cops from don't even mess with this. This is, I was on patrol with military police. You have a lot of domestic abuse on top of that. I mean, the whole city is gripped by depression, huge unemployment. A lot of businesses have closed because of extortion, because the cartels have become ultra-capitalist organization. They have new branches, kidnapping, extortion, and 30% of the businesses, not only bars and cafes, but also restaurants, car showrooms, every enterprise, construction companies, even funeral houses, they got visited, and then people want la quota, which is tax. And you have even, that's to illustrate the point of lawlessness, you have like small kids. They say, oh, we are from the La Linea, which is the Juarez cartel. And again, everybody can say he's from La Linea, and a garage owner doesn't know better. So basically, they pretend to be from a big cartel, so the business pay money. But then the cartel hears that some small kids are abusing their name, and then they get killed. So that's basically the total chaos, and it's called unorganized crime. And of course you have like a lot of women. Ciudad Juarez 10 years ago was very notorious for the women that were killed and raped and found dead or disappeared in the desert. And over 10 years there were basically 400 women killed. The thing is, nobody knows if it's still going on, because it has been totally overshadowed. In 10 years 400 women were killed, or I don't know if that is, don't get me on the statistic, it might be a little bit less or more, or but in the most violent month in Juarez, like 400 people were killed. So this problem totally overshadowed the disappearance of women. But this man, he beat up his wife, and the wife stopped on patrol, and the police, or we, I'm not the police, but the military police was able to arrest this man. This is the funeral of the traffic policeman you just saw. These are his friends and families. And again, I love this photo. I mean, these are very like normal, beautiful people, and the grief and it's. I try to portray civilian life in all its aspects. This is basically at night, and it's a little bit sketchy at night. Reminiscence a little bit of a Hopper painting, a junkyard. This is another interesting photo, a soccer field in exact caption is in my book. On a Saturday, two cars with again an armed commander just pulled up, and 10 people with Kalashnikovs and M16s pulled out, and they killed 7 people. And again, nobody knows what, nobody knows who, nobody knows why. I arrived a couple of days later, and I was able to still photograph this blood stains on the wall. And the very cynical thing is this stadium, this sports field was built with government funds, especially in the poor neighborhoods, to give them some divertissement, some alternatives, and a nice sports and soccer stadium. And again, the government said that these kids were criminals, and yes, 1 or 2 later on turned out to be criminals. But there was a famous incident in which 20 kids were killed at a party, and these kids were 14, 15, 16 years old, and 70 kids were killed. And then authorities said, yeah, these kids were involved with drugs. And then there was such a riot from the parents, and President Calderón came to Juarez. And then there was a big public talk in which one of the mothers from the children challenged President Calderón, and she was very vocal. This mother said, listen, my kid, all I know, my kid is killed, and you say my kid is a criminal. And she was very, not sentimental, but she was very open and direct, and even the wife of President Calderón cried down in tears. And Calderón, this was, you can see it on YouTube, it was a very dramatic moment. But again, authorities have this tendency to say all the murders are drug related, so it's basically we don't give a shit, criminals killing criminals, good riddance. This is a scene in Culiacan, and yeah, it looks a little bit funny. It looks out of a Monty Python movie with this. And I did not Photoshop that myself. They put it themselves, the placate cadaver. And again, this doesn't look too professional. Culiacan, at that time there were like a lot of gang-related killings. The Sinaloa cartel was challenged by another cartel, the Zetas. From a photographic point of view, at Ciudad Juarez, in the beginning it was very easy to photograph. I could go around with the authorities. Later they became more difficult. They want to portray a city, oh, we are fighting crime, and Juarez is not that bad, so you cannot come with this. And what the authorities did, as soon as there was a crime scene, they put crime tape, and you could not approach you couldn't get no closer than 100 meters, which is very bad for a photographer. You have to work with telelenses. But in Culiacan, they were pretty open. You could just go to the police and just go under the crime scene and just basically put your stick your camera feet away from a crime scene. This was in Michoacán, another province, state, and here I was invited by the local army with the other local journalists to destroy a crystal meth lab. I mean, cartels have started to produce crystal meth. It's a new drug. Extremely addictive, and it's a huge market in the US. And again, Army has like a PR strategy, and they love to invite journalists if they have a catch. This is. Are we right on time, or should I finish it? Yeah. Okay. I like this photo. It's a little bit a postmodernistic shot. A meta photo. A photo of a photographer, and in this case it's a soldier guarding a crime scene, and he's taking a snapshot. And why he's taking a snapshot, I don't know. Maybe to show his wife what he did, maybe for his own. Maybe he's an artist. Maybe he takes shots of victims and is going to make an installation. You never know. Or maybe he wants to show his colleagues, or maybe he feels very uncomfortable and doesn't know anything better to make a photo of this horrible act. What do you say?
Maybe he's writing a book.
That's also possible. Maybe this is like a good cover photo. All right, this were a short. All the photos are in the book, and of course the book is for sale here.
Keep us right for time, because I don't have a watch.
Oh, we have the watch here.
Do you? Ah, right, okay.
Analog clock, yeah.
Thank you for that. It's fascinating. The first thing I'd like to ask you is, why did you decide to go to Mexico? What pushed you to start taking photographs in these places after all the other photojournalism you've done? Why Mexico?
Yeah, basically, I'm a war photographer, and a war photographer, his job is to photograph wars, so it's basically as simple as that. I wrote in my introduction, this is like a new kind of war. traditionally you have like classic wars, interstate wars between armies, First World War, Second World War. You have a very clear declaration of war, you have a ceasefire, outcome of the war is decided on the battlefields, confrontation between soldiers, you have regular armies financed by taxation of a central government, so and civilians are not deliberately targeted. And then in the 80s and the 90s we saw a new kind of war. They're called postmodernist conflict or low intensity conflicts, or political scientists call them the new wars. And these were conflicts like, I've been in all of them, Colombia, Sierra Leone, Liberia, DR Congo, Angola, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Colombia, in which local warlords use ethnic, religious, or what kind of ideological grievances as an excuse basically to grab power, and a state of chaos and anarchy is needed for these people to exploit population, and population is actually targeted, and they finance their thing by exploiting local resources, diamonds, drugs, opium and coke, and timber. In Liberia, a lot of timber and oil. By making or black marketing, trading in smuggling in Yugoslavia, by having alliances with organized crime and criminal elements. But in Mexico, it has gone one step further, that the warring factions don't need to establish relationships with organized crime, because they very simply they organize crime. They are organized crime themselves, and the warring factions, organized crime, have become warring factions who are challenging the authority of the government, and very successful. So this is like a whole new kind of war. It's very hard to break. There is so much money involved, and what I say, they totally have infiltrated government on all levels. So this is like a very scary development, and I thought, being a war photographer, but also being an anthropologist who has become a little bit more reflective over the years, I thought this was a fascinating, horrific of course, but fascinating development which should be covered. And I'm right, that's another story. I'm going to pursue a PhD, because as a photographer you stick a little bit on the outside, so I really want to go on a more intellectual, academic level, more on the inside.
One of the things that is striking about these photographs and the violence in general is this public display of violence. If you would think that, if a criminal organisation wanted to murder somebody or a group of people, they might just get on with it and not tell anybody. But in this case, they're advertising it. It's become, if you like, a kind of public relations campaign. Not only does it assert the power of each criminal organisation, but it creates a climate of terror among the population. And one of the things I'm interested in is, why is it? Why this public display of violence? The last page of the book, and I would encourage you to have a look at it. You've taken screenshots of videos from YouTube, people being tortured or beheaded with chainsaws, and then these organisations posting them on YouTube for public viewing. And you can go on YouTube tonight and you can take a look yourself if you're interested. But that's a very strange kind of
it's very
violence.
dark and deep, and I don't want to sound too much like academic, but in killing you have like two dimensions. The instrumental dimension is basically getting rid of someone, eliminating an enemy, and then you have the symbolic dimension. How do you kill someone? And in most wars I've been, people are shot, sometimes very cowardly executed, and sometimes people piss over dead bodies. Excuse me the words, but that's how soldiers call it. That's part of dehumanizing an enemy. But in Mexico it goes one step further, the symbolic language. How do you kill someone? And people are decapitated, and then 13 decapitated heads are put on the video. People are cut in like 12 pieces each, 49 people. And then do the math. 49 times 12 is like 60 minus. That's like 600. I think. Whatever. A lot.
That's a lot.
I can do the math very quickly, but not now, right now. They put in plastic bags along the highway, or in rush hour in Veracruz, like a year ago. 2 trucks stopped in rush hour, and people threw out like 20 killed people. And this is like basically display to show the other cartels and the authorities and the population, don't mess with us. We are powerful. We are the worst. Cabron is a very bad word in Mexico. It means motherfucker. I excuse my language. We are cabronissimo. We are worse motherfucker than worse motherfucker. We are evil, bad, and don't. And also, authorities basically challenging. We can do whatever we want, and it's also marking of territory. And the very strange thing is decapitations. I was just reading a book, and they told me that the first decapitation in the Mexican drug war was like in 2006, and therefore it just did not happen. And some people say they were copycats. The first public decapitation was in our journalist friend Daniel Pearl, who got kidnapped in 2001 in Islamabad, I think, or was Karachi, I think Islamabad, and who got publicly executed. And that was, I think, the first public beheading put on YouTube by a terrorist group. And I think cartels maybe copycat. That might be an explanation, but I think it's like escalation of who can be the worst, who can be the most original. It's like a complete sadism, and I think these guys are like really high on coke. And if you're high on coke, you do these kind of things. I don't use coke, but I read somewhere that the coke basically burns down the senses, and you do.
I've read that as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned was these cartels have become ultra-capitalist, so they've branched out into exploiting every form of human misery imaginable. So the poison that's sold, the cocaine, the crystal meth, the heroin, the arms that are sold, which are in order to kill people, they've branched out into human trafficking of or smuggling of economic migrants, economic refugees.
Yeah, that's very sad. The folks from Honduras. That's sad.
That's right. Sex trafficking of women and young girls, piracy, extortion. Those have become multi-billion-dollar industries. They're ultra-capitalist, and they're exploiting that this social crisis, this vulnerability of the population.
Yeah.
The fact that society's become more fragmented and atomized as a result of neoliberalism and globalization. The first picture in this, the first page in this book, you might not be able to see it very well, but it's from one of the tabloids, PM.
Yeah.
So what you have is people who have been executed, decapitated, tortured, and almost on the cover of every issue is a dead body and a semi-naked woman right next to the dead body.
Yeah.
And there's a link there that people are disposable, they've become commodities, that the social cost of all this economic activity of the cartels has these costs, but it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference. So it is that, does that public display of violence, does that relate to the fact that people are just disposable?
Well, you mentioned a couple of things. First, the PM covers. There are like two. First, I have a lot of respect for journalists in Mexico. 81 journalists were killed over the last decade. Most of them, they are like local investigative reporters who investigate the links between authorities and authorities and organized crime. So if you write a story van listen, the gobernador, the Chihuahua governor has links with the Jefe from La Linea. You're playing with your life, and one reporter from Juarez was killed for that. But in Juarez you had two newspapers, El Diario de Juarez, very good investigative reporting, and PM. Actually, they sit in the same building, you know, so they all know each other. But the PM is more the tabloid like we have in London and the UK. I think it was actually invented here, tabloid. Am I right or not? But I think you have some remarkable publications here.
That's one way of putting it.
But same for PM. And basically, I took photos of the covers. At one point, actually, this year in August, I went. In March, I went back for my last trip. And I always like to do a little bit conceptual projects on the side too. So I photographed. I went to the newspaper. I know all the folks. So I said, asked for, can I photograph all captions, all covers? So I took all covers from the most violent year 2010. And basically on every cover there is death and misery, and of course a page 3 girl, which in Mexico, because they're not as hypocrites, has become the page 1 girl, you know. But it's pretty amazing, and I have a photo exhibition now in yeah. Oh, this is in Culiacan. Culiacan is more Catholic province, so that's.
So they put it on the back page
yeah.
in Culiacan.
But basically on every cover there was and I have had it right on an exhibition, and I've put all these 300. You have like 6 days a week because the sun is not appearing. 6 is like 512. 312. I have 312 photos, and it's right now in the loop. It's projecting on the screen. It's really very amazing to see the amount and the normality of that. So that's about the PM covers. But what you mentioned, disposable people, and this is one of the big problems in Mexico. Ciudad Juarez, Mexico was a little bit of a socialist country where you had a little bit of a minimum social welfare state. So the poor people had at least whatever. With neoliberalism, NAFTA, the difference between the filthy rich and the filthy poor became bigger and bigger. And right now you have like a huge reservoir of people who have nothing, no dreams, no chance whatsoever. And it's really shocking to see have like extreme poverty in Ciudad Juarez in the outskirts. People live in shacks, dirt roads, plastic bags. It's like completely unimaginable. It's not that people are starving like in Africa, but it's like a life not decent. And this, you create a big underclass of people that not only feel excluded, but they are excluded. And in Mexico you have this saying, it's better to live 3 years as a king as to work 30 years as a donkey. And they see as their example their parents who work in the maquiladores. The maquiladores are the assembly factories that the American companies put just across the border, where people toil away for like $100 a week. And they have a shitty life, and they can eat rice with beans, and maybe have on Saturday 1 beer. That's their life. So they basically listen. We might as well party up, become big time gangsters, and we're gonna die anyway. So what difference does it make? And it's a kind of youth culture: live fast, die young. And I already read a book from a Colombian anthropologist, Salazar, who is actually right now, I think, the mayor of Medellin. But in 1980, he wrote a book about the youth culture of gangs, basically, who had made a very rational decision. Basically, we are effed, we are fucked, so we can do 2 things: have a miserable life the rest of our life, or have some fun, and we're gonna die anyway. So let's go for have some fun. And this is again, this is going to be a global problem. And what we saw in London, the riots, of course, it was not extreme, but also you have a big class of people who are excluded, and they don't have really any perspectives. And for it's actually, people say, oh, these kids are animals, they're monsters. No, it's a very rational assessment of your situation. What you're going to do, you're going to have a miserable life for 30 years, or you're going to have fun and screw society, because society is screwing you. And again, they have as examples like greedy bankers, corrupted politicians, so they don't have really like moral...
I want to get to the greedy bankers in a minute, because there's quite a few of them sitting only a few miles away.
The only thing greedy bankers, I don't want to go. I think this needs research too. A friend of mine, I lived a long time in New York, and know a lot of friends of bankers, and I heard like this excessive use of cocaine, and I think cocaine makes a little bit over ambitious, and I think financial crisis has a little bit insensitive, and I think that should be investigated. But it's an interesting research topic in how far cocaine use is.
I'm looking into it.
Okay, it's not mine, but I know there are people, anthropologists, studying the financial sector, but it's interesting.
I mean, one of the things that you mentioned, I think we'll just have maybe one more question, then we'll move it over to the audience. A couple of things you said that I think are really important was these sweatshops in northern Mexico. So, you know, with globalization, with the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, people cannot really survive in the countryside. They move to the cities, they migrate to the United States, and they go to this belt in northern Mexico where the multinational companies, the American companies, have set up because the labour's cheap. They don't have to worry about environmental controls.
Labour laws,
no unions. You get the local police to repress anyone who's striking, etc. And a lot of that workforce was the female workforce. Had smaller hands, I don't know why, but they tended to be favoured more. So you had a lot of young men in places like Juarez who were kind of surplus population. They didn't have anything to do. There was no work. Their families might have left somewhere else to go to Juarez or Tijuana, and they end up there and they've got nothing to do. There's no real social infrastructure to speak of. There's no safety net. And from one day to another, along come these criminal organizations. They say, here's an AK-47, here's a wad of cash, you can use a truck. And so you've got these most marginalized sectors of the population who suddenly are empowered, but they're empowered in a way that gives them access to violence. So there's one thing, and so there's the connection there between the multinationals. And you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the banks, and in fact the whole global economic system.
Well,
the question I want to ask is, what do you see? This is a mess, and it's a deep mess. What is there a solution? And if so, what is it? Do we legalize dope? What do we do? Do we kill all the bankers? We can do that anyway.
Luckily, there is a solution, and I wrote it down on page 144. No, it's very complicated, and basically, I do agree with a lot of analysis, but basically a lot of theories, and I think you cannot only blame capitalism and NAFTA. Of course, they played a big role in creating like social inequality and huge reservoirs of like easily recruitable foot soldiers for the cartels. What I wrote in my introduction, there are like basically 5 elements in this problem, and they should be attacked, all 5 at once, or not attacked, but at least tackled. And one is, of course, the extreme corruption in governments, and how you should tackle that's very difficult. Mexico has a tradition of a very corrupt government. People never felt. Contrary to the United States, which is, some people might not disagree, and I hope I don't sound too pro-Yankee, but people in the US feel more involved with their government. They feel there's more direct democracy. Whereas in Mexico, the state was perceived as a club of the rich, who was there only to arrange. Most people in Mexico, the less they have to do with the government, so they have like a certain kind of fatalism, which breeds this corruption. The rich can do whatever they want. And as long as it was talking about banana plantations and mining contracts, it was whatever, you know. But now it's of course about killing and murder and terrorism. But corruption should be attacked in the government, and then of course there should be and now I sound like a socialist. There should be more social justice, that you don't have these reservoirs of young people. And I know right now I come from Holland, and Holland has totally switched to a free market economy. But I think a state has a responsibility to create some kind of social cohesion, and not only for a moral point of view, but also, of course, at the end it's counterproductive if people kill each other. It creates fears, the quality of life, which again is not expressible in money, but for the whole society it's bad, lack of social cohesion. So that should be addressed too, the problem of large unemployment of people who feel excluded and take career in crime. And then of course we have a huge problem of weapons. And again, I'm not against weapon, and I think every man should have the right to have a Colt 45. I'm sorry, but not to bring to public place, but to keep to do training practices on cans and bottles. I love to do that when I'm in the US, of course. But people should not be allowed to buy 100 M16s or AKs or bazookas. And this is what's happening now I drove all the way from Juarez to Nuevo Laredo on the Texas side. And I saw gun shops, you don't want to believe it, and people who had special offers for AKs, and today sale of the week AK-47, and no, that should be tackled. And again, but that's very difficult for the Americans, because the Americans are very touchy, you know, with guns, and it's in the First Amendment, and then of course there is the responsibility of consumers, and again, everybody that it's as simple as that, everybody that consumes cocaine finances terror and crime in Latin America. And again, I don't want to be moralistic, and if there would be some kind of green cocaine, you know, that would be like environmental friendly cocaine that doesn't drive away Indian tribes from their territories in Colombia because they need to make coca plantations, and cocaine in which the profits go into healthcare. I mean, whatever, you know. So I'm not making moral judgment. I drink wine too. That's my. But humans have a connection. And I was talking with Professor Howard Campbell, who wrote the introduction. He said it's a very difficult issue to address, because in the baby boom generation, the use of drugs was a form of rebellion against society, and the discourse that drugs is, to put it very simple, not good and causes harm, is normally associated with conservative, puritanistic groups. So it's a very tacky discussion. So you have to but this should be addressed. And actually, I sometimes write for Don't Laugh, for the drugs magazine High Times, and I wrote a story about artists in Culiacan. In Culiacan, you have a very active art society that works around drug violence, and I wrote down in the editorial that, and even the editor agreed with me, that Coke should not finance ultra-capitalist organizations. And I was very heartened to see that even a drug magazine wrote that. But then the last thing is like the financial sector. I mean, and again now we come back to the bad capitalist guys, but 20% of the brute national product in Mexico is drugs, and this money is laundered, and it goes also to American banks. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the HSBC. Yeah, who is like, and actually there was like a couple of weeks ago there was an activist, Mr. Sicilia. His kid was killed in a shootout, and his kid was like a decent student, 100 kilometers outside of, I might have some details wrong, but he was found executed in the car with a couple of his buddies. And they were completely legit students who didn't do any bad things. And this poet, Cecilia, what is his first name? Javier Cecilia. He started like a march all the way from and again, this is very strong, very powerful. And But I think he was like a couple of weeks ago. He went to New York, and he went to Wall Street, and he went with a case with blood-stained dollars to deposit on the HSBC bank, and predictably he was not allowed to enter. But but this issue should be addressed too. So these are 5 elements, and there are maybe more elements, but it's like a vicious cycle. And Howard Campbell wrote also in his introduction, it's like a perpetuum mobile. It's like all these elements, they power each other, and it's like a cycle. But you have to attack all these parts of the chain, and if you make some parts weaker, you can. And I think the other possibilities, you can say we give up. We think it's normal that organized crime is from now on the boss in Mexico. That's the other possibility.
It could be.
Excuse me for such a long answer.
No, it's great. It's great. And it could be that the new government attempts to re-establish its control over the drug trade that the PRI had during the 70 years of its rule.
Yeah, it's a very difficult political story, and you have two political parties, basically the Conservatives and the Socialists, or the Labour, very broadly speaking. And they say that the old Labour, the PRI, had like deal with the government, and the new party, whatever. But that these are really internal Mexican politics, and frankly, I'm not an expert on that.
Okay. Well, we don't have not much time left, so we'll open up to questions just now. There's one at the back there. Just wait for the microphone.
First of all, I'm Mexican. I'm original from south of Culiacan, 10 kilometers. I was born there some years ago.
From Culiacan?
From the south of Culiacan, 20 kilometers south.
¿Dónde? ¿De qué ciudad?
Guasave.
Okay.
Yeah. I've been living here for 3 months lately, but I've been doing security policy and research for the last 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And although I would certainly agree with most of your claims, and with some situations that you portray quite properly regarding corruption, or regarding some other issues, I would certainly disagree in portraying the situation under the basis of 2 cases, which are Ciudad Juárez and Culiacán. As most of the policy around the government, it's not that it has happened since 6 years ago, but it has been existing since 70 years ago. And the problem, you will also need to consider some other variables in the issue which you mentioned. It's the political part, development part, which you briefly touched, but also how the transnational nature of the conflict, the flow from drugs that comes from the south, and how it goes to the United States. It is not the fact that Mexico is the first consumer of drugs, but it is the fact that it's serving the main American market, which is just next to the border. And the issue with the guns, it's mainly because of American lack of cooperation. That's why the cartels are armed as they are. And I tell you that because I served 1 year with the federal police in the border. Yeah. I certainly exhort, and I would certainly welcome this type of efforts in like trying to portray how things are back home. But I would certainly consider some other variables. And I will certainly not mention the government of Felipe Calderón as a military dictatorship and some other situations. However, thank you very much. And I admire your courage and bravery to going in those places because they are certainly complicated.
Thanks so much. You should give me your. We should stay in touch.
Yeah, of course, I would be delighted
because, but yes, I went to the worst place in Mexico, Culiacán and Ciudad Juárez, and there was another worse place, Nuevo Laredo, where I didn't even take one photo because I was scared out of my. I bought these cowboy boots. I tried to act like a tourist, but in one day I thought it was better I leave Dodge, but basically, a lot of places in Mexico are beautiful. And nothing is happening in a large part of Mexico. It's very peaceful, but Ciudad Juárez and Culiacán are extreme examples. And I agree, American consumers have a responsibility, and American weapon traffic has a responsibility. What I already mentioned, but there are huge parts of Mexico where life is going on, and where
most of it, I would say.
Yeah,
it's a matter that has briefly. I mean, it's not solved yet. That's pretty much my research is all about.
Yeah.
But it's a matter that has been there since more than 70 or even more time. So it's not something recent for the last.
Yeah, but the violence, I mean, the drug trafficking and crime has been there for indeed.
Obviously, yes.
Yeah.
Because actually I support your argument about the psychological impact of violence.
Yeah.
However, it's not something exclusive of the last 6 years. Something has existed in some rural areas in Mexico since 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, you come from the most interesting area of.
Yeah, that's why I'm talking from experience.
Yeah, I know. But we should stay in touch. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's another question down here at the front. Whoever's got the microphone.
Thank you. Washington's intervention in drugs in Latin America has often been heavy-handed and misdirected and not achieved much. If it were to change its narrative of what's going on in Mexico, how much would that change things? Or is there just too much money washing around in there?
Well, you're talking now about American policy, which is a very complicated subject. And I've been living a long time in the US. I really appreciate a lot of things in the US. But in certain things, yes, they are heavy-handed. They're not efficient. And they are sometimes guided by ideological principles. I mean, in the war on drugs, it's basically thought not very pragmatic. If you look at what it costs and what the effects are, something is wrong. And it's also guided a lot by puritanistic principles. And I don't know what it is what Americans have with drugs, because Americans are the biggest drug users, but maybe a lot of Christian groups say the way God shaped our mind is perfect and don't mess with it. It's a sin to create another consciousness because God has created a perfect brain. I don't know where that puritanistic anti-drug stance is coming from, but I know for certainly it's irrational and emotional, and it's totally influencing the anti-drug strategy, where the anti-drug strategy should be approached from a very pragmatic, realistic level.
I suppose what I'm really getting at is, could Mexico break away from that, or is it stuck with what Washington demands of it?
What is that question?
Are the rulers of Mexico stuck with what Washington demands of it in terms of the rhetoric with which they deal with
well,
the drugs
Mexico
problem?
and the US, they have a pretty complicated relationship. First of all, I think the Americans took away how many % of the territory? 30?
42, wasn't it?
Yeah, 42. They basically... Mexico used to be huge, like Texas was Mexico and California, so they never got over that quite well, so they extremely anti-American. But then again, like most countries who are anti-America, they look upwards to Uncle Sam too, because Americans export high technology, good culture, good music. So basically, US will never dictate Mexico what to do. And but of course, there are forces in the Mexican government that like to be aligned with the US, same as the US has established military base in Colombia to fight the drug war there against a largely, I mean Latin America are very anti-Yankees, against the national sentiments as well, but I think in Mexico the anti-American sentiment is basically very strong, and I think large group of the population will not accept if drug policy will be dictated by the US.
It could be also that the war on drugs is a pretext in the way that the war on communism and the war on terror are pretexts. Yeah, completely different.
But that's not discussion, because some people say the war on terror and the war on drugs is just a way of establishing American hegemony. And again, these are theories. There is some truth in it, but again, it also is a little bit conspirational theory. But again, if America sincerely wants to fight drugs in Colombia and can put down a big military base, they of course very happy that on the side they have like a big military presence as well. Nobody will deny that.
There's another question over here.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. This is another Mexican in the room.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm a cinematographer. I was actually just shooting a documentary in Mexico in the fall.
In Mexico City or?
No, in Michoacan.
Oh, Michoacan, yeah.
Yeah, and also have encountered a lot of difficulty, especially, trying to record and photograph images, once you get involved with the drug cartels. It's very complicated to kind of cross the line, sometimes it's just dangerous. And I'm just wondering, you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that you were interested in going beyond just photojournalism, and now you were going to do a PhD to go deeper. And I'm very interested in human rights and just also helping the situation in Mexico, which is, just terrible. So I'm just wondering in which ways you think that you're actually able to take photojournalism and journalism one step forward. Into
well, I'm anthropology, so that's going to be anthropological research.
Right, but
yeah, but as a photojournalism, some photography registers the visual aspects and cannot photograph deeper motives or irrational workings of a brain. Can only register manifestations of that's what's going on.
Right. So, do you actually feel that with your anthropological work, you'll be able to, or your goal would be to create some change with all the things that you have observed and all the problems that you've experienced?
Well, basically, I'm a little bit concerned about this problem, and you can call it old-fashioned engagement, but you have to tackle it with multiple approach. One is photography, visual, and one is more academic. And a lot of people I met in Culiacan, a very brave group of artists which are tackling the same problem, but they use art, they use conceptual art. So there are different ways to create consciousness, but also to investigate what's happening. And again, I'm a good photographer, and they say I'm a good anthropologist as well, so I want to use that for going one step further.
How do you think that an anthropological study can help? Like, it's out of interest. Like, how can you use these as tools?
Well, I plan to do research, and the result of my research might be used by other people as tools, but I'm not creating tools. I'm just doing research and shedding lights on. I want to investigate, research on things which so far have hardly been investigated. And if other people, of course, I hope they can be tools for other, and of course I know there will be tools, but I'm not a tool maker. I'm doing investigations.
There's a question over here, and then over there.
Hi, my question's on a bit more of a basic level, but
I love basic questions.
Great.
So.
Well, just from my experience, religion's played such an important part of Mexican culture,
yeah.
Catholicism, and that photograph you had of the graveyard in the desert with the number instead of a name seemed to me a bit symbolic of religion lost, potentially.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if, in your experience of the areas controlled by the narcos, whether religion is perhaps more prevalent because people are turning to it as a coping mechanism, or the narcos potentially to justify their actions, or if you feel that it's less prevalent in those areas.
Well, that's very interesting because, as we all know, according to Christian religion, it's not good to kill your neighbor, and it's not good to cut them up in 20 pieces. In my research,
it's also wrong. I think that's what it says.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, it's undesirable behavior according to Christian doctrine. But for my research, I want to talk to some really bad guys, and you have to look these bad guys once they are incarcerated, especially in U.S. prisons, because it's more safe to. But that's one of the questions I want to ask. Listen, most of the people in Mexico are Catholic. How do you? I lost the American word. How do you reconcile your Christian beliefs with torture and killing people? But in Mexico, it's a very strong Catholic country. But it has like very strong Aztec roots as well. So you have like a lot of pre-Columbian religious elements. You have like a cult of the dead. And again, this is very strange. You have Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, in which people spend the whole night on the grave of their beloved, which I think I was there once, a Day of the Dead. And it's, I think, a very nice ceremony you spend with your friends or family on the grave of your mother or your friends. And you spend all night talking about them, drinking coffee and whiskey and smoking cigarettes, which I think a really great way to remember your friends every year. But you have like a very perverted cult, Santa Muerta, and this cult has become very hip among drug criminals, and they start to revere dead and to celebrate death and gory violence. And I took in my book, there is like I took a lot of shots. There is even like a new kind of a narco saint, a small criminal, Jesus Malverde from Culiacan, of course, who became a Robin Hood status, and people actually have like chapels for him, and so it's this whole study of religious influence is like a very complicated issue. But for most people, they are Catholic, and right now the Catholic Church has taken a very strong stand against narco criminals, and sometimes Catholic priests are killed and threatened, and a lot of people find a lot of relief and I'm sorry, I'm getting late, but a lot of people find a lot of comfort in to cope with the grief in Catholicism. But again, it's with all religion. People, everybody use it at different ways for its own purposes. Is that a good answer?
That's great, thanks. And actually, sorry, just whilst I have the mic, also you were talking about the narcos having an awful lot of money, which of course they do, and in all of your photos there wasn't much evidence of money anywhere, mostly poverty.
No, because I love to, I've been trying already, and I'm not disposing any secret, but I'm trying to photograph narco-architecture, really big villas of fat, decadent, and but so far I haven't been invited to narco parties, and I'm trying other routes. And so this is the most difficult part, because I would love to meet, and like 10 years ago in Culiacan there was like this very ostentatious consumption, a conspicuous consumption, as a sociologist Veblen called it. People are driving around in big Hummers, and like basically Hummers 3 times as big as normal Hummers, and they were proud of it. But then when the drug war started, the narcos realized we have to put it a little bit more profile. So if you take in Culiacan photos of Hummers, people are a bit edgy, and you don't want to annoy people in Culiacan.
There's a question over here.
Thanks very much. Even though it was a really useful talk, and I was in Ciudad Juárez in April 2011 doing some anthropological research.
April 2011.
Yeah. On the violence there, and I thought it was quite interesting how you mentioned very briefly the kind of the mass murder of women in the 90s and up to about 2001, people estimate. And I was kind of wondering if you see any link between the kind of the murder of the women, and particularly the fact that it was so visceral and so brutal. And so public as well, and with the kind of violence that's happening now and has been happening since around 2006, which again is so visceral and so public and so brutal.
Frankly, to put very honestly, I don't know too much about the killing of women. There were 1 or 2 books about it, very good books. I did not read them, so I must admit that I'm not really knowledgeable on that point. And I'd rather give you a frank answer as some kind of. But according to it's like part of a scene of impunity. It's just a hypothesis, you know. Maybe people find well we could get away with killing lots of women, so we can basically get away with and it's of course symptomatic for already like a weak state. But it's part of my book, on the part of books I need to read. So.
Time for 1 or 2 quick questions. Anybody? Are there any more? So, do you want to go first? There's one there and then one at the front, I think.
My question is...
sorry, one at the back first.
Oh, sorry. Should I go ahead?
The guy in the shadows.
Okay. Mexico has one of the 3 biggest oil fields in the world, Cantarell. It's been in rapid decline. And some associate this with the rise of the drug cartels. Do you see any evidence of that, or is there any connections there?
Again, I'm an anthropologist, and we study small cultural participants, local actors, and these are like really huge macroeconomical things, and I somehow have a blind spot for them, so I cannot. There are other people who are very good, Noam Chomsky, who are very good in answering these. But I know Mexico is a filthy-rich country. They have like an awful lot of oil, and if you go to the gas station, I drove all the way through Mexico, and if you pump your gas full, you cannot stop smiling. So cheap is it, you know. But basically, it's a total disgrace. Same in Venezuela. This country is so rich, has so much oil, but there's still so much poverty. And your other big, these are really macroeconomical questions. I'm not very good in. Apologies, but I rather give answers. I'm knowledgeable.
There was a question here. Do we have time? Yeah, there's.
Just a really quick one. There's been a advertising campaign here in London just in the last few months for Colombian tourism. using the kind of drug thing as a bit of a tagline, you'll be scared you won't be able to tear yourself away, this kind of thing.
What, so you won't be?
Yeah, the tagline, something like, the only thing to be scared of is that you won't be able to leave. They're trying to use the people's fear of going to Colombia. They're turning it around to make it attractive, to say that this is now a really attractive place to go as a tourist. And what I'm wondering is that you're talking about Medellin used to be the most dangerous city in the world, and obviously it's no longer so.
No.
And Colombia seems to have cleaned itself up a little bit. Has that been at the expense of Mexico? Is Colombia really a great place to go as a tourist these days compared to Mexico?
Well,
or is the government just kind of, fooling us?
Well, Mexico has become safer. I was in a time when you could not drive from Medellin to Bogota because you also had checkpoints from FARC. The power of the FARC has been broken, and of course the FARC had, they called themselves revolutionary, but I think after 40 years people stopped to be revolutionary. Colombia has become safer, but of course there is still a lot of drug production going on, but basically in a very interesting way the Colombian cartels decided, listen, we're just gonna produce the stuff in the jungle and we don't want to get involved in smuggling and risky behavior, so all the rest we outsource to the Mexican, let the Mexican come here, let the Mexican arrange the transport. So basically it's still going on. But the Colombians have made a very intelligent calculation, the cartels, very capitalist calculation from the government is breathing in our neck and really cracking down on Colombians transporting. So let the Mexicans come here and maybe we'll earn less money, but our chances of being incarcerated and even worse, extradited to the US will nearly diminish. So it's going on a different level now.
Then maybe the last question, very briefly.
But I must say one thing: it's this a lot of politicologists and political scientists. We discuss these issues a lot, but it's like a very closed. It's not like you cannot go to the Medellin Cartel. Can we see your annual report and how much? It's not like that, So it's a very hidden world. So it's very difficult to do research.
Just one last one. Isn't it time that here in Western Europe that we take the first step and legalize all drugs?
No. Basically, I don't think it's a good idea to legalize crystal meth or crack cocaine. And there are certain groups of society, mostly the well-educated people with money who can, in a very responsible way, use cocaine and even heroin. But you cannot. And again, from a government point of view, a government wants to have a population that's healthy, and so a government don't want a population that's hooked and addicted to drugs. And basically, some people can use drugs responsible, but the worst thing is if you want to legalize, you should have like very precise structures, because you cannot leave it to the free market.
But if you walk within 2 blocks of here, you will almost certainly be able to buy any illegal drug without any difficulty whatsoever. So it's freely available anyway. So if we legalize it, we're then taking one step to remove the drug dealers out of the market.
No, but it's a very, I think you have different kind of drugs. It's a very complicated discussion. I think certain drugs should be legalized, for instance, marijuana. But what you saw in Holland, that was legalized in Holland. What you saw, you have these criminal enterprises growing marijuana and just making it so strong. Right now, the THC content is like 20 times higher as it was 30 years ago. And marijuana, because of capitalist enterprises, has become a hard drug. And these people are not like the old school hippies van let's have, but I think it's a good idea if you can just grow a little plant of weed on your balcony and just whatever, and bother nobody, and you don't finance the cartels. I mean, it should be like that, but you cannot leave it to the free market, because they will invent new drugs, they create a market, they make more addictive drugs, and that's right now what's happening. And again, the government has to walk a tight balance. I mean, I think I have the right to experiment with my mind as I want, and I don't want any government interference. And this is, of course, already the biggest nanny state in the whole world, with, I think, more cameras as CCTV cameras as people in this country. But I think you cannot say, listen, you know what? Let's just all legalize it. I think it will be, I think a government has a perfect right to restrict the trade and consumption of crystal meth.
Okay, well, thank you very much to everybody for coming along. Thank you to Toon Voeten for an excellent presentation. And
yeah, my books are for sale.
You can buy his books, and I highly recommend it.
£25 cash.
And
you can get a receipt if you want.
I'm assuming that you're going to the bar afterwards?
Yeah.
So you can continue this discussion in the bar.
Yeah, and everybody, especially the people who are doing research inquiries and the people from Mexico, please come to me and we should stay in touch. And I'm always afraid of people from Mexico answering me questions because they know the situation firsthand, you know. So and I'm always afraid that someone from Mexico is saying, listen, we love your photos, but you're full of shit. But so far...
I could have told you that. Thank you very much.
But again, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.